after all three have presented this morning. And with that, I'd like to introduce Natasha Krasnow, and she'll be presenting a paper that she and Kelly Poole have done entitled Above and Beyond the Crystal Mill, Recording the Crystal Townsite in Gunnison County, Colorado. Hi, Natasha.
Hi, good morning. All right, let's attempt the screen share. Okay, we should be in the tunnel. Let's share entire screen. There we go. Okay, tunnel, slideshow. Hopefully that's working. If it's not, somebody definitely let me know. All right, well, thanks for tuning in bright and early, everyone. I am Natasha Krasnow with Metcalf Archaeology, and I'm presenting this morning from my home, which is located on traditional Ute lands. And while I will be doing the speaking this morning, I did not do this alone. As Greg mentioned, my incomparable colleague, Kelly Poole, also worked on this project, and she helped develop the presentation. So I'm going to give a quick project description and history of crystal, followed by presentation of the mining era buildings, and we'll finish with the results of our 2019 inventory. But we're not advancing. Oops. There we go. Okay, success. So most of you are probably familiar with the Crystal Mill, the historic structure perched above the Crystal River about 5 miles east of Marble and 18 miles northwest of Crested Butte in western Colorado. But the truth is, it's not a mill. It's the remnants of a powerhouse. But that iconic and picturesque mill is not the focus of our talk today. If I can get it to advance there. All right. Located just above the mill, between the north and south forks of the Crystal River along Gunnison County Road 3, is the ghost town of Crystal, the historic mining camp that was associated with the mill. In September of 2019, Kelly and I spent several very difficult, unwelcome days in Crystal, staying in a restored historic cabin while we conducted an architectural inventory as the aspens were starting to change. And as you can imagine, we had a perfectly miserable time slogging through this fieldwork. The project was conducted for Gunnison County, who received a certified local government grant from History Colorado to undertake an architectural inventory of the Crystal's remaining buildings. The grant was financed in part by the Park Service with a National Historic Preservation Act funds. So beyond bringing the individual building recordings up to date, the broader goal was to assess the historic district potential for Crystal. And the town and the mill are privately owned, and this was all done in collaboration with the owners. Most of the property and buildings in town are owned by the Crystal Mountain Ranch and have been in the same family for 6 generations. Several of the ranch's cabins have been restored for Airbnb rentals, which is where Kelly and I stayed. And a handful of the buildings and smaller parcels in town are owned by other individuals. So sitting at 8,950 feet, the Crystal Valley is surrounded by Sheep Mountain, Little Bear Mountain, and Mineral Point. The north and south forks of the Crystal River converge at the location of the mill, and the Crystal River continues generally west toward Marble from there, eventually draining into the Roaring Fork. So Crystal's history is a mining town. It extends from around 1880 to 1917. After the Utes were forced out of the area around 1879, miners quickly filled in behind them. So by early summer of 1880, prospectors were making their way to the Crystal Valley through Crested Butte. When they found silver ore deposits, the Crystal mining camp was established. By 1881, around 20 cabins were present, and the camp was officially incorporated later that year. Crystal gained a post office in 1882, and by 1883, the town's population was 600. In its heyday, in addition to the post office, Crystal boasted a newspaper, saloons, a stage line, 2 general stores, a pool hall, a hotel, a gentleman's club, a 2-story town hall, an assayer and chemist, a livery, a barber shop, and over 70 houses. A blacksmith shop and cemetery were located just outside of town near the mill. So as you'll know, if you've been there, access to Crystal and the surrounding mines is a challenge. It was a major hindrance to the town's development from the outset. And for the first few years, Crystal was extremely isolated, with only mule trails leading to Crested Butte to the south and Carbondale to the north. In 1883, the trail between Crested Butte and Crystal, passing through neighboring Silver Camps Gothic and Schofield, was upgraded to a wagon road. And after that, Crystal's population increased, but still the road between Crystal and Crested Butte was extremely dangerous, particularly the Crystal Canyon section between Crystal and Schofield. As historian Dwayne Vandenbush puts it, the road was one of the most treacherous in Colorado. In winter, the canyon vomited avalanches. With its 27% grade, that stretch of road through the canyon past the infamous Devil's Punch Bowls is still considered one of the most dangerous 4-wheel drive roads in the state. And on a personal trip, we did make it in that 99 Ford Ranger, but I don't recommend taking that vehicle on that drive. Between 1886 and 1909, Crystal residents were promised several times that a railroad branch would be built, providing the town and the nearby mines a much needed boost with better transportation, but the railroad never came. So leading up to the silver panic of 1893, the decline in silver prices had already caused a sharp drop in Crystal's population by 1892. Luckily, the Crystal Mill and Powerhouse allowed nearby mines to continue operation. So the local mill and powerhouse are what got Crystal through the silver panic when other silver mines and towns went bust. And although Crystal survived the panic, the town never fully recovered, and the newspapers folded in the 1890s and the post office closed in 1909. So by 1915, Crystal was largely deserted. A year later, a minor revitalization took place when nearby mines resumed operating and shipping ore. But by 1917, that revival was already dead. The last mine closed for good, leaving Crystal a ghost town. So in short, access difficulties coupled with the drop in silver prices led to Crystal's demise. Still, it had persevered for a time when its neighbors, notably Gothic, Schofield, and Snowmass City, had folded. To quote Dwayne Vandenbush, Crystal is perhaps the best example of a North Country town which stood amidst too much adversity. After mining ended, a few people continued to seasonally occupy the town. In 1938, Emmett Gould arrived in Crystal from Aspen in search of ore. He bought several mining claims, the mill, and several lots and cabins, and Emmett's descendants are the owners of the Crystal Mountain Ranch. Since the mid-20th century, several other families have used Crystal as a summer home, keeping it occupied part of the year. There are no year-round residents. Today, tourism has skyrocketed. People making the trek between Marble and Crested Butte over Schofield Pass and through Crystal Canyon drive right through town. And according to the ranch, visitation numbers to the mill have increased exponentially in recent years to as many as 300 vehicles per day. So moving on to field work. We documented 14 buildings with original construction dates ranging from 1881 to the 1970s. 11 of those buildings date to the mining era, and they are what we're showcasing. These buildings include 7 residences, 1 barn, a social club, a general store, and a schoolhouse. An additional residence, the Taze Anderson House, was previously recorded and needed no further work, but it's also a mining era residence that is now quite the showplace. There's the Taze Anderson. It is said to be where then former President Grant stayed during a trip through this area. So all but 3 of the mining era buildings that we documented are of the pioneer log construction style. According to History Colorado, this style has log construction, the use of round, hewn, or rough milled logs, notched corners, simple construction techniques, and a gabled roof. In addition to these traits, the crystal buildings also include entries on the gable end, which is a pioneer log trait that evolved in the West as a unique response to snow accumulation in the Rockies. They get plenty of in Crystal. So we'll take a peek at the buildings now, strolling along Crystal's main and only street. All buildings are pioneer log, except for when I say that they're not. And we'll begin with the 7 residences we recorded, all named after historic owners. The Norling Meal Cabin, built in 1895. It has been updated over the past 75 years as a family summer home. So it does not qualify as pioneer log, but it still retains its historic mining town character. Norling Meal is owned by Bonnie and Roger Neal, and Roger has spent his summers in Crystal since 1948. He's even written a book on Crystal's history, which is on its 5th edition and is a great read. And he was in town during our field work and was very generous with his knowledge. The Fogel Cabin, owned by Roger's sister, it was built in 1892. It is built of hewn logs, but instead of having corner notches, we see a variation here where the horizontal logs are held together with vertical corner posts. The Erhard Cabin. This was built around 1890, 1895, and is constructed with saddle-notched round logs. This is another long-time family-owned cabin. The Clayton Cabin, built 1895. It has square-notched hewn logs, and remarkably, that thick, fibrous mud daubing on the primary facade is mostly original. And this is one of the ranch's Airbnbs. You can rent this one. The Rosetta Cabin, it was built sometime prior to 1895. It is unique in Crystal's, among Crystal's pioneer log cabins because it has 2 full stories where the rest only have 1.5. And this building also includes an interesting diamond pattern in the wood shingles on the front gable and an eyebrow-like hood over the center window. These features are kind of an interesting juxtaposition of Victorian era architectural styles superimposed on top of an otherwise rustic building. And I also really like the super defined square notching of the hewn logs on this cabin. And this is also an Airbnb. The Edgerton Cabin, built around 1895. It is also an Airbnb and is where Kelly and I stayed. It has square notched hewn logs, and what I love about this cabin is this distinct axe notch in one of the logs on the primary facade right there. There's a close-up. Please note the CCPA scale of this notch. And the notch is clearly visible in a historic photo of this cabin. So I think that's pretty darn cool. The last mining era residence that we recorded is the Melton House, and it is not pioneer log. Architecturally, this is an upright end wing with a rear addition. It was one of the first buildings in town and was likely built around 1881, the year the Melton family arrived in Crystal. The Meltons were prominent in town, and according to historic newspapers, they held many acclaimed holiday celebrations for the community in this house. The barn. One barn remains, and it is pioneer log. It's built of round and hewn logs that are both square and saddle notched. It was built likely around 1890. The Crystal Club. It was the town's quote-unquote gentleman's club, built in 1899, and it was strictly for men. According to Dwayne Vandenbush, here men could gamble, drink, conduct business, and shoot pool under club authority. The Crystal Club is built of square-notched hewn logs, and much of the original material inside is intact, including the floorboards, ceilings, wall finishings, and wallpaper remnants. Remnants of the original canvas sign are also still present out there on the primary facade. And while the Crystal Club is now mostly empty, some locals have taken up residence in the upper story. The schoolhouse, it was built in 1891 by community members and had improvements done in 1894. The highest number of students enrolled in school recorded was 14, and that was 1899. The last lesson was supposedly held in 1910. And the schoolhouse also has this unique diamond shingle pattern in the front gable, like that of the Rosetta cabin. So the schoolhouse is awesome. It's in pretty good shape, and as a rural one-room schoolhouse, it meets the distinct design standards laid out in the National Register of Historic Places multiple property documentation form for rural school buildings in Colorado for this time period. So according to that MPDF, these types of schoolhouses are characterized by having one story, being a wood frame, having shiplap siding, a gabled roof, a rectangular plan, a central entry in the gabled end, a large sash windows evenly spaced on the side walls, a single undivided interior space. So the schoolhouse has all of those characteristics, and such schools are increasingly rare in the region.
Hi, Natasha, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, finally, the general store. Built by Albert A. Johnson in 1881 using steeple-notched round and hewn logs. The wood front door is original with the original mail slot, and it also historically housed the post office. So today, it is still used as a general store by the gift shop and a gift shop by the ranch. So we can't leave the general store without talking about Al Johnson. Originally from Canada, he came to Crystal in 1880 as a prospector, but built and opened the general store in 1881. From the outset, Al was Crystal's leading citizen and was influential in town until his death in 1893. He fostered the town's growth by first opening the general store and second by securing the postal contract in 1882. He served as postmaster and a postman until he died, and he also launched, edited, and published Crystal's first newspaper, the Crystal River Current. By keeping his store well-stocked year-round, Al made it possible to overwinter in Crystal, which was and is snowbound each winter. So he provided continuous inventory to those who stayed, offering both domestic products and mining supplies for continuing nearby mining operations year-round. But Al is also remembered regionally for his impressive skiing and expanding Gunnison country ski culture. So according to Dwayne Vandenbush, Al gained notoriety as a legendary postman who dependably delivered mail between Crystal and Crested Butte year-round on what became known as the Snowshoe Express. His route, which included that feared Crystal Canyon we talked about, was possibly the region's most perilous due to the steep terrain and avalanche danger. Al became recognized as the top skier of the Rocky Mountains for his technique in completing his treacherous mail route. He was also famous for winning numerous Western Slope ski races, and his fame helped popularize recreational skiing in Colorado. In 1886, he organized wildly popular ski races in Crested Butte, Gunnison, Irwin, and Gothic that together became known as the Great Race of 1886. The Great Race introduced competitive ski racing to the Gunnison country. And to commemorate his influential skiing, in 1974, Crested Butte skiers began the Al Johnson Memorial Uphill Downhill Telemark Race that's still held annually at Crested Butte. And additionally, a play called Let 'Em Run, Al Johnson and the Great Races of 1886 was written by Gunnison playwright Michael Callahan and has played to sold-out crowds since 2016.
1 minute
Al
left.
Johnson was awesome, and Kelly thinks I have a crush on him.
1 minute.
Sure. Oh, thank you. So results. In the end, all 11 of these buildings were recommended eligible to the National Register under criterion A, C, and D, with 2 minor exceptions. All meet criterion A for their direct association with the historic mining boom in Colorado. all meet D for their archaeological potential, which will be a cool project in the future, I hope. 8 meet criterion C for being examples of pioneer log construction. The Melton House is eligible under C for its upright and wing architectural style. And of course, the school is eligible as being an outstanding example of the rural one-room schoolhouse. The only one not eligible under C is Norling Meal, which has had too much of its original construction material removed during upgrades. But because its improvements have not ruined the overall design or historic character, it's still eligible under A and D. And finally, the A.A. Johnson General Store, in addition to being eligible under A, C, and D, like the other buildings, it's also eligible under A for commerce, given its role keeping the town and area mines well supplied. And it's also eligible under B for its direct ties to Al Johnson, given his significance to the town and the region with regard to skiing. So altogether, we found that there is great potential for an historic district around Crystal with a suggested period of significance of 1880 to 1917. All those buildings that we presented would contribute, as would the Tays Anderson House. The district could also potentially include the mill, surrounding mining operations, and archaeological features yet to be documented. So needless to say, this was an awesome project to get to work on, and we had a lot of help. I want to thank everyone on the slide for the opportunity and for support in fieldwork and reporting and research. And we have a slew of references from all of the awesome research we got to do. And that is it.